So you asked them, what did you ask them?
Ask them, do you know anything about impeachment?
No, that just sounds like we don't agree with your decision. We don't agree with your decision-making process. We don't think you're fit for the office of president.
This situation is accountability. No matter how powerful you think you are or how sneaky you think you are, people are always watching. For him, it's like, these American people, they look up to you.
That's the level of crimes we were talking about. They were upset about a decision of picking someone for a job.
Hey, listen up. Welcome, family. Welcome to the GenXYZ Family Podcast, where we use our different generations to examine the world around us.
Join our family table talks where we bring you in with us to learn how to talk about the stuff no one wants to talk about, from politics to pop culture, looking for the bright spots beyond the headlines. With your hosts, Jay and Katie.
And the Kid Crew. We use the generations X, Y, and Z to remind us to examine different perspectives, searching for the lesson, laughter, or light in every story and each one of us.
So, if you're part of any family, a part of this world, and wonder, how do I talk about that? Join us as we figure it out.
Let's go!
Welcome, family. This is the Generation XYZ podcast. You are sitting at the table in our casa with the Martin family, and I am your host, one of your hosts, Katie Martin, and with me today is...
The J. Martin.
And with us, we also have the Kid Crew, and this is only half of our Kid Crew right now. We have...
Ramon Martin, the greatest.
And we also have on the blue mic tonight, sharing the blue mic, we have... Journey Grace is in the place, and
Isaiah.
Awesome. And so we are going to be talking tonight all things impeachment, but we know that when this hits your ears, it's going to be the beginning of January. So happy New Year. So hopefully you've partied hard, and sadly, impeachment will probably not be over. So it will still be a topic that you will be discussing. And if you're like us and like our family, we're very interested in learning all of the perspectives and as much as we can about any topic that is continually flooding our ear gates and eye gates, and so we chose impeachment.
Emphasis on continually.
So my husband and I, my baby and I, we are going to chat first about some things regarding impeachment, and so sit back, relax, and we're going to dive in. All right, so the first thing I know I wanted to talk about...
What do you want to talk about?
...is the definition of impeachment, right? We hear it all the time. We think we know what it means.
So what is impeachment?
Impeachment is the impeaching of a public official before an appropriate tribunal in Congress or a state legislature. And so that is from dictionary.com, and that is what that is. Now, the common definition on the streets, right? So we always hear impeachment, but what does that really mean?
What does impeachment mean?
What is it in the streets, right? It's basically like you getting fired. You handed your pink slip. If somebody impeaches somebody, the gig is up. You got to go, right? We gave you a shot, but you got to go. So it's the involuntary removal of a president. So you can also impeach judges. Did y'all know that? Impeach judges from office after a conviction in the Senate. But more importantly, we hear a lot about, you may have heard in the news, the sham impeachment or something to that effect, and the fact that Congress can't impeach someone or they're doing it wrong. And so Articles 1 and 2 of the Constitution, everyone say Constitution.
Constitution.
And the Constitution gives the House of Representatives the sole power to impeach. So let's talk a little bit about, there's the House of Representatives and the Senate. All right. So what you've been hearing about is if there's been allegations or basically any sort of evidence of possible misdoing, especially in this case by the president.
To include treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors.
Yes, thank you. And so that's specifically what you're going to constantly keep hearing. And so the Congress basically has the authority to do this. The Constitution gives it to them. And unfortunately, there's no real rules about it. Have we used impeachment in the past in the U.S.?
It's funny you should ask. So, ironically, 8 U.S. presidents have faced the threat of impeachment, while only 3 of them, I believe, and we'll go into it, actually face an impeachment trial.
So I didn't know 8 presidents
face the threat of impeachment.
And that's another point too. When we talk about the threat of impeachment is a broad term, right? if you're being investigated or the House of Representatives has an impeachment thing going on, it's considered impeached, right? There's an impeachment inquiry. There's impeachment going on. And so that's why you'll hear people say it differently about different ways, because technically it's the whole process.
Of the 8 people who faced the threat of impeachments, 3 of the presidents were actually or went through an impeachment trial. First of which was Andrew Johnson. Interesting facts surrounding why. So he was impeached March of 1868 over the decision to dismiss his Secretary of War.
What's interesting about that is Congress was upset because they didn't like his decision about picking someone, right? They thought there was something bogus in the decision. That's the level of crimes we were talking about. They were upset about
a decision
of picking someone for a job. Carry on.
So so now the question is, does any of that sound immoral? No. That just sounds like we don't agree with your decision. We don't agree with your decision-making process. We don't think you're fit for the office of president. So therefore, we're going to start an impeachment trial. So I want you to keep that in mind once we dig deeper into, or we go down the cycle of what impeachment looks like today, right? So our next person, Richard Nixon. Have you guys ever heard of Richard Nixon?
Theory.
So I want to know what you guys have heard.
Just the Watergate scandal.
Okay.
The biggest thing.
Okay, so what does the Watergate mean to you? Like, how do you guys learn it?
It's like, we always hear about it vaguely in school. It's like where he was, I believe, set up spy cameras was on some situation. That's all the knowledge I've.
That's all you remember.
He had people go into someone's office to steal documents to get something off the record.
So you're correct. So Watergate was basically 1972, 5 burglars entered the DNC offices trying to steal documentation that they could use to basically start framing some of his candidates. So his whole modus of operandi was, if I can get dirt on certain people and make them look bad publicly, it'll weaken their public support and their support will come to me. Right, so we think of Watergate, but Watergate was kind of only the tip of the iceberg. So this happened in 1972. His impeachment, or some of the things that they looked into to impeach him, started all the way back in 1970. And they give you a quick rundown.
And real quick, I was just thinking about the Watergate thing, right? And you talk about what they were trying to do is manipulate the information and kind of get a heads up to know what the other side was doing, right? Which is also, if you talk about today's world, right, the manipulation and the misinformation campaigns that go on where we hear about Russian interference and how easy it is to misinterpret.
Say that again.
That's normal. It's kind of what you see every day.
You see every day, right? Because the misinformation can be so common because it's just flying all over the place. But back in the day, they had to literally bust down and get up in there. You understand? It wasn't as easy as just crack a social media platform, create a fake name, blah, blah, blah. But it's all the same concept. I need to find out what you know or what you think or what you're going to do. Now they steal your data or your analytics.
Some of the things they found out that he was doing is, for instance, he used some of the money basically from either his campaign or just some of his own cabinet's money to basically frame in a New Hampshire newspaper alleging that the leading Democratic presidential candidate, Senator Edmund Muskie of Maine, referred to Americans of French-Canadian descent as basically a term that they considered a slur, to the point where this dude, Senator Edmund Muskie, had to go on the news, literally broke down in tears trying to deny this. I really did not do this. Ended up losing his supporters. His supporters then voted for the other Democratic nominee who Nixon beat out in a landslide. So they knew, okay, if I can figure out how to plant dirt on this guy, he'll lose support. They'll put support into this guy who's already a weak candidate, therefore bolstering the likelihood that I'm going to be president. His saga did not start unraveling until multiple members of his cabinet kept getting fired based off of misconduct. And this was between March and April of 1973 is when his whole cover-up started to unravel. 10 days into the investigation, 4 of Nixon's top officials resigned. His presidential counsel ended up turning state's evidence basically on him and told him about all of the hush money he was paying people.
So what is that? And also, when you see an organization or a government entity or agency, and all of a sudden people are quitting by the droves, they're leaving, they are exiting the building. What does that say? What does that say to you?
Something's going wrong in the nucleus of that company.
In the nucleus of the company, right? There's something happening where people are leaving. right? Either in many different forms of fashion. And so keep that in mind. Like anytime that you're looking at a company, you're thinking about going to work for a company, you want to start a company, anything else, is that leadership flows down, right? Like, and if people are fleeing in droves, right? And this goes for churches, this goes for anything. If people are leaving a particular entity in leadership, there is a reason.
So basically, more stuff came out. They finally, so it turns out, obviously, it's in the White House. Everything is recorded. So they finally turned over or subpoenaed documents. He didn't turn it, well, subpoenaed tapes. He didn't turn in tapes, turned in like over 1,000 documents. But basically, the American public got to see some of his conduct and how he some of his conduct going on in the White House, and was pretty appalled by it, to the point where he figured out, the House brought him up on impeachment charges, or brought up an impeachment, and he figured out he was not going to win the Senate vote to not be impeached, so he decided to resign. So one of the quotes from one of the figures in this whole process, Archibald Cox: "Whether ours shall continue to be a government of laws and not of men is now for Congress and ultimately the American people to decide."
And that's where we are today, right? Where we talk about Congress has the sole authority. What do you think that means in an organization where it's like if you have a mom and a dad, or you have two moms or two dads, or grandma and grandpa, or whatever you have, what does that say to you when there's like two different branches or three different branches of something doing that? What is the function of that for you? What does that mean to you?
There's people that are going to check you. So if you're going to go crazy, someone's going to be like, hey, you can't do that. In a sense, if you're talking
checks,
about,
right?
About like a family situation, it's like at the same time, it's like, yeah, you're a parent, but you're putting these seeds into children. If they don't respond well or things don't go as planned, it's going to backfire.
So if all of a sudden I start going crazy, right, and I start telling you all stuff and leading you astray and carrying on all kinds of ways, whose first line responsibility is it going to be?
The guy to my left.
Right? So it's going to be the other adult in the building.
That would be me.
That would be you. And so same thing here is like when you think of the legislative branch, and then we have the executive branch, and what's in the executive branch?
President.
The president and all his agencies, right? And so
what's in the judiciary branch?
The judges.
The judges. So, but they all work to keep each other in check, right? That's how the Constitution set that up. So that one person can't just jump off the train and start going bananas. That's kind of the whole point. It's like any time that begins to happen, the system's in place where it'll begin to check itself.
So the most recent one was Bill Clinton. And that whole impeachment trial was based off of an affair. Based off the president having an affair with one of his interns while serving as president.
Well, and ultimately, that was the trigger. The articles of impeachment were perjury and obstruction of justice, right? Because normally, as you know, you do some dirt behind the scenes or in your closet or wherever it is that you think you're doing dirt and you think nobody can see you. But ultimately, there's other symptoms and manifestations that end up coming out of that tricky thing. So he was doing dirt behind the scenes in the Oval Office. But because of that, they got him on potentially lying and obstructing justice and telling people not to do things. Because now what happens when you do something? What do you want to do? Cover it up. Most people, not you guys, people who are doing dirt, the next thing they do is now, in order to cover up your dirt, so you just murdered somebody, not you guys, you just murdered somebody, and now what's the next thing you do? You hide the body. But now you got to kill anybody else that saw you with the body. So it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And so that's how dirt, same thing with Nixon, it's there. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take to come out. How many people, what tapes, what receipts, what text messages, it's all going to come out in some form or fashion. Because in our system, it's accountability. One person cannot go crazy without the rest of the system stepping into check. So we should never be upset when Congress or the Senate actually do their jobs.
That's why they're there.
So do you guys know who controls the House of Representatives right now?
I do not.
Do you know whether it's Republican or Democrat? Democrat.
I would assume Republican.
Okay, so it was, right? And so right now, so as of October 2019, Republicans have 197 seats and Democrats have 234. So that means technically it's a Democratic House.
They have the majority.
They have the majority. And in the Senate, the opposite. Okay, 53 Republican, 45. So it's the opposite, and then obviously Republican White House. And why is that important? Because of the checks and balances and the accountability. So it's important to do that. So when we just all had our election 2018, it was such a big deal because it went from being a majority Republican in Congress to a majority Democrat, and that's in a way a very good thing, because if it's Republican, who's going to check?
Nobody is.
Who's checking the power? Because we hope that we have elected, your dad and I, like when we voted Republican, we were hoping we were electing people who would stand for principles, stand for the same thing every time they went and stood up. And what it has come down to is that is not what has been going on. All of a sudden, people that we voted for have like fell asleep and acted like nothing is happening. So right now, the House of Representatives is Democrat. So they're going to vote. Basically, the House of Representatives gets to vote on the articles of impeachment. Just to even go to a trial, it's considered you've been impeached.
Yeah.
Because Bill Clinton also had his articles go from the House of Representatives to the Senate. He was found not guilty in the Senate, but he is still considered to have been impeached because it patched the House of Representatives. So House of Representatives, and then it's going to go to the Senate, and we're pretty sure that they're going to get the votes right because all they need is 218. Do you guys know what country this all involves?
Ukraine.
Well, the current impeachment.
Yeah, the current impeachment,
Ukraine.
right? What we're talking about. Okay, and what do you know about the Ukraine, or what?
The biggest things we see in the news, like the Ukraine call. I don't know what official he was on the phone with, but apparently there was, conversation about trying to dig up dirt or find things about Joe Biden and his relations with his son and business over there, whatnot.
Yep. So he basically told or asked the Ukrainian president, the new guy who wanted to be in good with the U.S., he's like, hey, bro. And this was on the July 25th
What's up,
call.
bro?
He was like, hey. And then he's like, it's so great you're here. And the guy had been telling their people and your people tell my people he's wanting to get into the White House. He wants a meeting and a sit down with the president, because why would a new president want to sit down with the president of the United States?
Well, it feels like it'll bring you a lot of clout in my situation.
Yeah, well, that and it shows it's a public display of solidarity. It's, hey, I'm here to play ball. We have the same interests in mind. How do we cooperate?
And so there you have it. He's on a call. The president knew that's what he wanted. Also, even more importantly than this meeting is the fact that we supply military aid and money to this small country that's fighting over there. And they specifically, the Russians, they're trying to hold off the Russians. And we provide money in the tune of, for in this particular instance, $400 million and military aid. So the president has that kind of in his back pocket. Congress already said, pull the trigger. And now we have a situation where we didn't know this, but he was using that as a bargaining chip in order for President Zelensky, the new guy, to investigate Biden and his son and go on this rabbit hole of a chase, or whatever the case. It has nothing to do with the military aid, has nothing to do with our national security, and it has nothing to do with a White House visit or anything else. But
It has everything to do with trying to, it's like we talked about Nixon, trying to find dirt that I can use to help me get reelected.
so even if something with Biden somewhere and his son somewhere had, that's something that a president, it's literally illegal. There's in the Constitution, it's called the Emoluments Clause. And it's literally, you cannot use your power, your position to basically try to get your own way, use your own power, your position to try to exchange anything. So, right, you can't be like, hey, I'm the president, but like, I really want this for my daughter over here. And can you look into something on her boyfriend because he's crazy and I'm going to give you 10 tanks. That's not how that works. So that's where we're at. That's why the Ukraine is such a big deal. It's also a big deal because they're one of our allies. What's an ally, Journey? Do you know what an ally is? No. So an ally is what? A friend. Right? Ukraine's our friend. Why? Because they're also fighting Russia, who's really not our friend, except now all of a sudden, maybe they're our friend. Like, we don't really know what's going on.
Have you ever heard of the term geopolitics? What does that mean to you?
I've just heard of it before.
Yeah.
Vaguely, don't have any knowledge to it.
So when you think of politics, what do you think?
Governments.
You help me out, you help me out, I help you out, right?
Yeah.
I have an agenda. I'm going to figure out how to use you to accomplish my agenda. You're going to figure out how to use me to accomplish your agenda. Mm-hmm. If we do it in an amicable way, we have a relationship that works out for the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the ideal politics. So when we talk about geopolitics, so we're all the way over here in between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, and Russia's on the other side of the world. So why should we care about Ukraine?
Well, if I see what you're saying, like if we disagree with, say, Russia, we're going to have as many people that agree with us around that certain country.
So if we can have a country like Ukraine that buffers Russia and the rest of Europe, it's in our best interest to be friends with these guys.
Yeah.
So what's in their best interest? It's in their best interest to maybe have a big brother who can help them fight this bully who's next door. Mm-hmm. It's in our best interest because now we can help them. We are closer to keeping an eye on our perceived enemy.
Yeah.
And now we actually have boots on the ground right next to Russia. Mm-hmm. Do Russian troops have troops in Canada or Mexico?
No.
No, right? But we have ideally troops in Ukraine, so now we're closer.
Exactly.
We are giving them military supplies, which I'm pretty sure that means we're also giving them training, which means we have people on the ground to train them.
Yeah.
Right? So now we have a group of our people sitting next door to one of our enemies. We can keep a closer eye on them than if we just isolated ourselves over here in the West. So ironically, there's a lot of countries that borders Russia from what's considered Western Europe, so like Poland, Germany, Italy, and those other countries. So it's like Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine, Moldova, Romania. But Ukraine is one of the biggest countries, and they've had a long-standing history of conflicts with Russia.
Yeah.
And a part of the big deal about geopolitics right now, and why this last election or this last 3 years have been interesting, is because a lot of these different countries we are in, or these different conflicts we have been a part of, is because of when you hear American interests. You might say, okay, well, why are we in Iraq? What do we care about Iraq? Well, we have U.S. interests. A lot of what we do revolves around oil.
Yeah.
There's a ton of oil that comes out of that part of the world. So it would behoove us, if we are so dependent on oil, to have some sort of interest as to what's going on in that part of the world, i.e., who's leading what countries, who are they allied with, right? So if you remember Syria was allied with Russia, was allied with certain factions of Iran, right? So if we're enemies of Russia, and these guys are friends with Russia, but they're in a region that's oil rich, now we have a problem.
Yeah.
Or we could have a problem. So Ukraine is important due to geopolitics. They are Russia's neighbor, who we consider ourselves to be an enemy of. So it's in our best interest to make sure that they can defend themselves, to help defend our interests as well. Yeah. So that's why Ukraine's important.
Ukraine's also important because, or let me say this, when there's a conversation, if you're on the phone, and let's just lay this out, let's pretend Long Reach High School, which is the big high school that's in the area. Well, it's not the biggest, but it's one of the big high schools. And the principal of Long Reach is on the phone with Deep Run, which is the elementary school. And they know that Deep Run and Mayfield Woods, which is the middle school, are kind of in a battle. And Long Reach tells Deep Run, like, hey, guys, I know you need our help fighting Mayfield Woods, but we need you to do us this favor. And the favor is look into this political campaign issue for me, which has nothing to do with national security. Were you going to say something, Journey?
So basically, it's like Deep Run's friend, but at the same time, it's Long Reach.
Right. Deep Run and Long Reach are friends. And if Long Reach pulls the military aid back, what does that say to Mayfield Woods?
They don't. Long Reach doesn't care about them.
Well, no, Mayfield Woods is fighting Deep Run. And if all of a sudden Long Reach pulls out, what's going to happen to Deep Run?
Mayfield's going to go in and attack.
Mayfield is going to go in and have a field day. So if Mayfield is listening to this conversation and knows that Long Reach is about to pull out its aid and Deep Run is going to be standing there by itself, are they going to be susceptible to attack?
Greatly.
Because now, even though Long Reach didn't call up Mayfield and tell him that, how did they learn that?
They're peeping. They're listening in.
The whole world knows that President Trump was withholding aid and said, Zelensky said, we need help over here. And he said, yeah, well, I want you to do us a favor. So what does that say to Mayfield Woods Middle School, if you heard that?
That's an abuse. That's straight up an abuse of power right there.
It's an abuse of power, but what's going to happen to Deep Run by Mayfield?
They're toast.
They're toast.
Yeah.
Because now they just heard that their big brother, Long Reach, is not in the game with them. So this is your moment to take them. So think about that. Russia now heard the U.S. was not protecting Ukraine. They're open. They're vulnerable, right? Now, eventually, they released the money. And they released the money because ultimately someone leaked the call. And we'll talk about the whistleblower. But ultimately, that's what ended up happening. We're going to get ready, and the kid crew's in the building, and then we're going to go ahead and turn it over to them, and you're going to find out what's being said on the streets, on social media, and in their hallways about impeachment, y'all. Stand by. Generation XYZ, the podcast.
How do you feel about impeachment of the current president?
Good, because I do that like Donald Trump, because he is mean and like pathetic and selfish, and he just tells people what to do, and it's rude.
I know it's about the president and if he should get fired or not.
Okay. What do you feel about that situation?
Good.
You feel good? Why?
I mean, the president's Donald Trump, and I don't think he's doing a good job at it because he's like selfish to me.
All right, so we are back, and that was
back.
Lyndon Franklin, one of our nephews, and he was giving his interpretation and thoughts on impeachment. So thank you. Shout out to Lyndon. I think what's so interesting there is the notion that you can only know something based on information and knowledge. So he said, well, I think blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure we could poll a bunch of other kids in other households, and then you would hear something totally different based on what knowledge or information or what they're focused on or what their parents are focused on or whatever news station is focused on. So let's go to Journey. Journey's been talking to people. She is Journey Grace in the place, and she's also known as JG. She is our elementary extraordinaire correspondent.
Extraordinaire.
So you asked them, what did you ask them?
Asked them, do you know anything about impeachment? And
What did they say?
they said, I know that it's about the president. It involves like the president.
Okay. What else did they say?
They said and it's like them discussing and fighting over it. I think it's pretty important.
Yeah.
I would agree.
All right, Isaiah. So Isaiah is our upperclassman and artist and track star in the building and in the house. And he also did some corresponding for us and touching base with the high school community. What can you tell us about what people said?
So I just simply asked a question to a couple of students in my classes. I asked what they knew or felt about impeachment, and Kaylee, 11th grade, said that she didn't know much about politics, but she knew that Trump has done wrongs and deserves impeachment and said, get him out. I also asked Garrett, 12th grade, who said that I believe that impeachment is an important part of the government and Donald Trump should be impeached.
Interesting. Okay. What are your thoughts, or what was kind of the vibe as you were or in your school, you think?
I feel like most people are probably on the same boat where they believe that Donald Trump should be impeached based on his actions and things that obviously have been released to the media. And obviously a lot of students have taken government, so we have to learn about impeachment at some point. So we all have a pretty common ground knowledge of what impeachment is and the process. And so it's a lot easier to talk about something like that because pretty much everybody has the same kind of idea.
Same baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to go over to our in-house college and basketball beast in the house.
Junior.
Ramon.
Junior.
And so he reached out to some of his friends and some of his peeps, and we actually have some audio from some of his friends. And so we're going to go ahead and go to that audio. We'll talk about it. Let's hear that.
My view on the impeachment is that it's necessary for them to look at, only because of his track record, and Trump, the president, has done some sketchy things.
My view on impeachment is that I don't think it should happen. I mean, his term is about to end. There's about to be new people coming in next year. And I feel like if you impeach him, the vice president is pretty worse than Donald Trump. And if we're just talking about impeachment in general, I think it's a good thing in case the person actually is like complete garbage and literally nobody wants him. Like, it was 100% like the wrong decision. But I mean, it's too late now. We only have like a year left. So yeah.
Hi, this is James Hirschberger talking about Donald Trump being impeached. My particular views on this is if he was to do something so stupid, like throw us into war, I would think he should be impeached. He hasn't done anything too stupid just yet to be impeached. Like, he's not exactly the greatest kind of character, but he hasn't killed us so far. So I don't think he should be impeached just yet.
I do not have any opinion on impeachment because I have yet to educate myself on what is going on. So, yeah.
And we're back. Thank you, gentlemen, for those lovely insights. It was interesting to me to hear, and Ramona, I want to hear what you think, is everything is based on, their opinion is based on what they know or what they think, obviously, of the individual. And whether or not something like Jameson says, well, we're not dead yet. So that's for him is a standard. Well, we're not dead and he hasn't done anything too bad. We're all alive. So I'm just curious as to what you think with regard to that standard.
I like attribute that to, I guess, demographic and where we've been around. Like Jameson, obviously, where he's from and where we're at currently, you see two different opinions on certain things. So in a sense, I can understand why he said what he said because, to him, like, I guess that is the worst case scenario, but he doesn't see everything else as bad as, most people would see it. So for us, we kind of take these things a little more heavy on the shoulder. It's like, whoa, like, I'm not going to just let that slide. But some people, to them, it's like, that's not a big deal, quote unquote.
So do you think that the president has to kill people in order to lose his job, I guess, ultimately? And there's nothing wrong with what Jameson said. It's just, it's funny and it brings up an interesting thing. I think everyone has a different line for them to where impeachment lives. So should the president have the highest or the lowest standard?
I would say the highest standard.
And just like Isaiah is going to get in more trouble if he does something than you would get if you do something, right?
He has more responsibility than I do.
Right. Why do people stand by a person when there's so many flags? And that's in general. If you have a friend who is continually doing things and you get a really irky feeling in your spirit, why do you continue to identify with that person?
I think for some people, it's a moral threshold that they just haven't explored yet. So they kind of wait for something to affect them first instead of seeing how it affects other people. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of avoid any drastic ideas until they are directly affected. And that's when they're forced to make an opinion.
I mean, it's interesting. Like if you identify with someone, you're going to rock with them pretty hard. And that's what's curious here is like, even though the behavior has gone way beyond legal bounds, they're still rocking with him regardless.
It also is based off of something deeper. It's something that you identify with deeper. Right. So I'll give you guys
self-identity.
Give you guys say yes. Thank you. Self-identity. So in the 90s, one of the biggest murder trials that she and I lived through was the O.J. Simpson murder trial. Right. So here's a case where you have this famous football player in college.
That's a good example.
The college and in the NFL, right? Who everybody loved. He was one of the first black athletes to be able to transition and have commercial success outside of football. And everybody loved this guy. No matter where he went in America, everybody loved this guy. Everybody in America knew this guy was guilty. I'm guarantee you, if you were to do a random sample from whatever year it was, 1993 maybe, or whenever the trial was going on, despite all of the incriminating evidence against him, if you were to do the exact same poll in the black community, it would probably look extremely similar to this. 11% of African-American men think OJ is actually guilty. And it's because you knew he was guilty, but people still stuck by OJ because there was a deeper sense of self-identity. He is somebody I can look at and see myself, and I would not want myself wronged. He's somebody who's had some level of success, and if he fails, it feels like we will all fail. So there was a certain self-identity people had with him, even though it is blatantly obvious this dude is guilty as ever, and he is only in this for himself. He only started identifying with the black community once he was in trouble and needed the black community's public support to help him out in his trial. So that's an example, a tangible example, if you want to use another community as a sample as to how this thing will actually play out or has played out in the past.
Which is also why it's so important for each one of us in your families and in your daily life to recognize who you are so your self-identity isn't linked to an individual. Because the hardest part about that is that if you're not solid in who you are and you link up with whoever this person is and all of a sudden they go off a track and off the cliff, you have no choice but to go with them if you're not grounded into something bigger and something deeper. So self-identity, knowing who you are. It's great to have mentors. It's great to look up to people, but you have to do your own self-checks and your own spirit checks to be able to figure out, wait a minute, something's up. And that's partially the Holy Spirit gives us that, to know when something is up. And so we honor people, we respect people, but we don't follow people off of a cliff. And so that's the very key thing, is that when you're built up in your own identity, then when other identities kind of falter or fail because they're human, you're not caught up in, I have to defend this person to the death. Because like, for instance, then you have someone saying, well, they haven't killed us, or maybe they're not that bad, or like, no, he hasn't done anything that crazy yet, because people think that that standard is way up there for them because they're like, well, I wouldn't want nobody pointing at me. But that's not the standard for the president, and that's not the law. That's a cool standard you could have for your friends. That's cool. You can have that for your family. That's cool. But you can't have a system of government that has checks and balances if you're not holding people accountable. And ultimately, we want you to be thinking about courage. What does it take to stand up when these types of situations are going on in systems, in governments, in families, in churches, in any organizations that you belong to? What type of courage does it take? So have you guys heard of the whistleblower?
Whistleblower is somebody who stands out and decides to speak out against like some sort of corruption or injustice that's going on.
Whistleblower is a protected status so that it guards against another check and balance. So if Sally sees Bobby hauling off, selling governmental goods, lying to people, stealing checks and paper clips and paper and everything else, then Sally can say something and you don't have to worry about it. So that's how this all kicked off.
Even if Bob's Sally's boss.
Even if Bob's Sally's boss. Even if Bob is the president. Sally has an obligation to say something, and she has protection to do it. Even when it's hard, even if it's against your friends, the people that are testifying at the impeachment hearing, the people that testify behind closed doors, and the whistleblower and anybody else who will come forward, because there will be more people that come forward, I want you all to think about the courage that it takes to do something like that. And never jump on the train that is just making fun of, tearing someone down, pointing fingers, and not really talking about the issue. I just want you always all on the lookout for that courageous spirit and to think about that. Where does this all leave us? Like, what can we take from all of this? And for New Year's, as when the New Year's folks, we're going to be in a new year, we're going to be listening to this, impeachment's going to be going on. It's likely going to be headed toward the Senate at this point. And what nuggets should we be able to take out of this?
This situation is accountability. No matter how powerful you think you are or how sneaky you think you are, people are always watching. Doesn't matter what you do, somebody's going to find out. It's going to come to life. So, be careful, tread carefully, but do the right thing. Most importantly, like, don't do anything you'd be ashamed of.
Yeah, try not to commit crimes. Yeah,
for a whole multitude of reasons. Like morally, I feel like, man, as my parents, like for him, it's like these American people, they look up to you.
We want to make sure that individually that we represent what we would want our leaders to represent. Even if our leaders don't always represent that, it's what am I cultivating? And then sometimes what we learn from a poor leader, a bad boss is ultimately how not to be that person. I mean, I've said that I've had bad bosses, and as horrible as the time was, it was, well, what can I take from this and make sure that it never happens again? And I'm never that person.
Even the people we look up to and admire and follow, we don't always agree with every decision they make. But one of the things that we will always be on board with is their character.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So there can be a leader, I may not necessarily agree with his policy on A, B, C, or D, but if I trust that this is a person of character, I trust that they arrived at that decision for a reason. And I also trust enough to know maybe I'm not privy to all the information that led to this decision, but I trust this person's character enough to know this person is doing what's best for the country or for the company or for the family or for whatever. Does that make sense? So even like, for instance, as a family, right? So she and I, we're kind of the heads of this thing. There are decisions we'll make that you guys may not even understand. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. If this was me, I would have done A, B, C, and D. But you guys have to trust enough in our character to know, okay, even if I don't understand it right now, I'm pretty sure they're doing what they're doing for the betterment of us and for this entire family.
That's what we want to take with us. Is that what can I take? What nuggets, what pieces of character, accountability, courage, bravery, and your identity in who you are. Who God made you on the inside of you. is going to outlast any president, any situation, but that you're always honoring in everything that we do. If you're honoring as a leader, you may be the president of the United States one day, but that you honor that position, you honor the people that you serve, and then ultimately you honor yourself, right? And so that's what we're trying to cultivate and kind of pull out from every situation. Well, I think that's all we got tonight, y'all. Thank you for joining us here in the Blue Room at Generation X, Y, and Z. We will see you later. Take care. Happy New Year.
Well, family, this episode has come to an end, but don't stop the conversation. And remember, it's not what we talk about, it's how we learn to talk about it. Sending love and peace to your every moment.
And if you can't get enough and want to see how crazy it gets here at the table, for behind-the-scenes footage, GenXYZ videos, outtakes, and bonus conversations focused on education, exploration, and impact. Join us on Facebook, Martin's on the Move. Instagram is at GenXYZ Podcast. Twitter, GenXYZ_podcast. And if you have ideas, suggestions, or just want to reach out, email is genxyzpodcast@gmail.com. All sources and links to audio and information referenced in this episode are listed in the show notes. Theme song beat by DefStarz.
Tell us what you think. Please don't forget to write a review and subscribe to get notified every single time we're at the table. We can't wait to see you again. Till next time, never stop seeking the GenXYZ vibe in everything you do.
And we're out.